Arturia Pigments has this super amazing feature that you can use the internal sequencer to not only trigger the internal pigment sounds, but also to trigger some external instruments. So in my case, I could, for example, sequence the Nord drum with pigments. I could also sequence some other plugins I like with pigments, or what this video will be about, trigger my Vermona Perfourmer with pigments. And those two have some super unique ways of interacting with each other. And as some introduction, let's just listen to some music that I recently recorded where the sequence was created with pigments and the music was created with the performer. And as you could see, it inspired me so much that I finally released some music again with the music you just saw the snippets of. And you're warmly invited to listen to it. Also, I'll upload some video version where you can actually see what kind of knobs I turn on the Perfourmer in a week. But for now, let's just look at the whole main principle and how it works. So inside your DAW, you just need to load pigments onto one MIDI track. And now, if you're using Ableton, there's this one thing that I found out, that you need to use the VST version in order to make this work. Because first of all, I watched some videos and was really excited about this idea. But then I tried with the AU version and it didn't work. And then in some forum, I actually found some comment that said like, try the VST version. So in case you run into some similar option, just keep this in mind. So I'm going to select the VST version now. Now you need to create some second MIDI track, and here you either put your plugin that you want to use, or in my case, I'm going to use the external instrument effect in Ableton, because this way I can send the MIDI out from Ableton Live to some hardware instrument. And if you're interested in how this exactly works, there's also a video I made in the past that I'm going to link here. Now, on the MIDI track where you have the instrument that you use for the sound, you also need to select that the MIDI comes from pigments. And here, that's in Ableton the important thing, you need to once more select pigments, and this is only available with the VST version, not with the AU version. Don't ask me why, but at least it works this way. And now we need to also create one static node, so this way we just constantly trigger the sequence. And inside pigments, or first of all, you also have to deselect the sound engine. You can also do it inside the plugin. I do it this way. And activate the sequencer. I just have some default patch now, so we just start by triggering individual steps, but it's enough to see that it works. And for the external instrument, I want to send it to my audio fuse and channel 1. And then I also have to create some other track actually for listening to the audio. And now you can see that the signal from the sequencer is reaching my performer. So I could also now change the pitch of the sequence and it would just translate it to the performer. And simply the fact that you're able to do this is just so amazing to me, and I was incredibly curious about trying this with the performer. And now I want to show you some things about the sequencer that you can do in order to make it sound less static, and how you actually create this interesting interplay with the instrument. And here you can see that I have basically two sequences, because one is for the bass, which means I have one sequence that I only send to channel 1 of the performer, because I always like to have one part that is more for the bass function and some other part that is for the melody function, because I have then the melody sequence that gets sent to channels 2, 3 and 4. And it's going to be used in P1 mode, because this is this amazing mode where notes get triggered after each other, so you get very interesting melodies, interplay and also rhythmic effects if you sometimes mute a channel. You'll see in a second. And let's start by taking a closer look at the bass sequence. So now I can play it and you see that we receive it on the first channel. And one important thing is that here on my MIDI controller, I mapped the speed of the sequence to one control. So if I, for example, turn this knob, is it this one? Ah, it's the other one. I always mix them up. So I can make it faster or slower. It's really slow. Almost never trigger it. And this on itself is such a banal setting to just map the control of the arpeggiator or sequencer speed to a MIDI controller, but it's so efficient because you can change the whole vibe from some super aggressive 16th note type sequence to something super calm. And inside the sequence you can see that I didn't do any melodic movement, but I used the randomization function, because this is basically my favorite part about the whole thing, to use randomization. So you have to turn this cube all the way to the top and also select some scale, because this way you can just have some improvised melodies based on a scale, but they'll never be exactly the same. So for this example I picked melodic minor, which is a very nice scale. And very important is also this regeneration function here, because we can tell the sequencer how often it should generate some new melody. So you can go as crazy as doing this on every 16th note, but I picked 2 bars and sometimes I'm a bit confused by how it really relates, so you have to listen to it, because right now the sequence is also divided by 4, so it's 4 times as slow as, for example, those other triggers here, which I also like to play with because it's great for adding a little bit of variety and irregularity, so it's not like everything moves at the same time. And also, for the trigger probability, I've selected the highest randomization mode. So also here it gets reconfigured every 2 bars. And this way we have some gaps. So not every note is always triggered. Most of them are, because it's usually on 100%. But still we get some gaps. So if you put this, for example, to 30%, you have way less notes. So this is also something you can play with, and also select some parts of the sequence that are more important to you. This is actually a very banal setting. And also one super important thing is that you can lock a step. So here I locked the first step because I wanted to make sure that the first step of the sequence is always going to be played for some stability, so it doesn't get too random. And also it's always going to be the root note. So in this case C, or if you program a clip in D, it would be D. It just means that it's the first note, or actually the real note you programmed your static clip in. Let's look at the melodic part now, because as I mentioned, I'm using this P1 mode on the Perfourmer, so we get those super nice melodies that always sound a little irregular, because also the individual oscillators don't have like exactly the same setting. They are kind of close to each other, but there's enough difference in order to make it sound less static. And also I panned a little, like 2 of them to left and right, not on the instrument itself, because I'm using the individual outputs. So I did it inside the DAW, and just listen to what happens. And here I added a little bit of melodic movement despite the kind of randomization, because as you can see it's active again, not as much as on the other one, but still enough to create new melodies all the time. And sometimes this way you can tell the sequencer to move more. If it's all on C, it's more likely to also trigger the C. But if you also just draw a little bit of some melodic movement, it helps adding some more movement, even with the randomizations. It's always really intuitive, and I don't have like this master plan. It's just really fun to try this stuff by listening to it, and then it ended up like this. There's no big science behind it. Also, you can see that the randomization this time is on 4 bars, so we keep the melody for a little. And that's also something I like, because this way it sometimes sounds like there's a new melodic fragment that gets introduced after those 4 bars in this case. If you have like a new randomization for every note, there's less repetition, and a little bit of repetition is actually nice. And that's also why I like the sequencer so much, that it doesn't sound like just random if you use randomization functions. There's something musical about it, and it repeats certain patterns that this way sound like you composed it a bit more, and that's perfect for a sequencer in my opinion. And again, the octave gets varied a little, randomized, and the trigger probability is the same as with the bass. Again, I locked the first note. And what's important here is that the irregularity is not created through some other division, because everything is on like the regular pattern, but you can also activate the poly mode, the poly retrigger I think it's called, and you see that the melody only has 14 steps while all those other sequences have 16 steps. And this way they kind of get shifted, and other kinds of combinations between those steps are created. And it's a little abstract, but in the end it basically just helps that the sequence doesn't always sound the same in terms of the steps that are triggered, and there's even more variety and interplay. Also here I have some control to change the speed, and here it's really fun because I can make it faster than the other one, because here we're in the regular rhythm, not on the divided by 4 kind of thing. So I can get those really crazy melodies, and it's just so much fun, although it's such a banal control. And then you basically have those sequences running, and all you do is basically focus on the sound of your instrument. So in my case it would be the Perfourmer and some other modulation. So with the Perfourmer, for example, I like to have those individual outputs so I can use individual effects. So I have a send for reverb and a send for delay. So I can also just send one of those channels into a reverb or a delay, and this way not overburden the sound. Because if you always send the stereo sum into some effect, it can be a little limiting and also just quickly too much, and this way you can control it in a very smooth way. And also there are 2 controls for changing the delay feedback and tempo, so I can also mess with that, and it was incredibly fun in this performance. Like here's another little snippet where you can see where this was used. You're warmly invited to listen to 30 minutes of music that have been created this way. You can find all the links down below in the description for the streaming platform of your choice. I'll also put it on Bandcamp. And also in a week, or maybe you watch this later so it's already online, there's going to be a video performance where you can see how I turn knobs on the MIDI controller and the Perfourmer, because I recorded everything. I still have to edit it. So you're also warmly invited to watch this. I'll link it here. Here is some more inspirational stuff about sequencing in Pigments and being creative with it. And apart from that, I just wish you lots of inspiration with whatever it is that you create, and really hope to see you soon again at this channel. Bye!